boardroom was silent. 12 men and women, titans of tech, sat frozen as Jordan Hale, the 38-year-old founder of a $2.4 billion AI company, slid his resignation letter across the polished table. His hands didn't shake, but his voice did. "I'm done," he said. "I'm moving to a farm." No one laughed. The same man who had outcoded MIT grads, who was once called the brain behind Silicon Valley's future, was trading algorithms for agriculture. But no one knew the real reason. Not yet. Before we dive in, if this story resonates with you even a little, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, hit the like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. These real-life stories always come with a twist you won't see coming. Jordan Hale had it all, and it was very real. A millionaire before the age of 35, he lived in a penthouse with a sweeping skyline view, sipped espresso brewed by a machine that greeted him by name, and commuted in a self-driving car with a brain arguably sharper than some of his own engineers. His AI firm had just inked a groundbreaking partnership with a national healthcare chain to reduce diagnostic errors at the scale. But something felt wrong. The algorithms grew more precise. Jordan, more detached. Then, one morning, after 36 straight hours spent debugging a recursive anomaly in a cancer prediction model, an email from his younger sister appeared in his inbox. Just 2 lines. "Dad's MRI came back. Glioblastoma. 4 months, maybe 5. And just like that, the code stopped mattering. The hospital smelled like bleach and quiet grief. Machines beeped in irregular rhythms, like tired hearts learning to let go. Jordan stood outside room 312, his father behind the glass, thinner than he remembered, his skin pale against the hospital gown, tubes everywhere. Jordan had coded life-saving tech, but not this, not glioblastoma, not his dad. For weeks, Jordan tried to fix it. He flew in a private neuro-oncologist from Switzerland. He offered an untraceable $5 million to any researcher who could suggest a novel therapy. He even fed his company's quantum AI all global glioblastoma trials and asked it to find hope. It returned 12,000 papers and no solution. He started sleeping on the hospital floor, laptop beside him, trying to rewrite the algorithm of life. But no variable fit. No input changed the output. His dad got worse, started forgetting Jordan's name. One night, Jordan overheard his father whisper to the nurse, "I don't want to die near machines. I want to die where the sun wakes me. I want to smell the soil. I want to go home." Jordan didn't hesitate. 2 weeks later, he bought a 120-acre farm in Mendocino, not for himself, but for his father. He converted a barn into a hospice wing with wide-open windows and planted lavender where his dad could smell it in the breeze. Chickens clucked near the porch. An old radio played blues from the 70s. His father passed away 92 days later, but he died smiling. And Jordan never went back. At first, Jordan planned to sell the farm, but something shifted. He noticed that he felt again, for the first time in years. Sunrise meant something. Dirt under fingernails felt like life. And he started thinking, what if AI could support small farmers the way it supported traders? That idea birthed Verdant Mind, a platform that used real-time soil sensors, climate data, and predictive AI to help farmers grow healthier crops with fewer chemicals. Within 18 months, 40,000 farms were using it across 12 countries. And yet Jordan still rose at 5 a.m. every morning. He didn't need to. Verdant Mind was now valued at over $300 million, run by a new executive team in San Francisco. But while investors called and journalists begged for interviews, Jordan was more often found bent over rows of heirloom tomatoes or quietly fixing a broken irrigation line with dirt under his nails. Something was different now. He wasn't chasing quarterly reports or user engagement charts. He was watching the weather, listening to the wind, tracking migration patterns of the barn swallows that had returned for the 3rd year in a row, and the ripple effect was astounding. One small family farm in southern Kenya had doubled its cassava yield using Verdant Mind's predictive alerts. A rice farmer in Vietnam had avoided a devastating flood by following the system's satellite-flagged warnings. Even in California's drought-stricken Central Valley, farmers were cutting their water usage by 30% without hurting crop health. Jordan didn't announce any of it, but word spread. One autumn morning, a school bus rolled up his long gravel driveway. It was a fourth-grade class from Oakland on a tech meets nature field trip. Their teacher explained that most of the kids had never touched a chicken before, let alone seen how food was grown. Jordan led the tour himself. He let the kids feed the goats, taste sun-warmed strawberries, and run their hands through compost to feel what yesterday's trash turns into tomorrow's dinner. But the real moment happened under a walnut tree. A small girl named Alina tugged his sleeve and said, "I want to be like you." Jordan crouched beside her. "You want to write code?" She shook her head. "I want to fix things that make people sad." That night, he added a new section to Verdant Mind's roadmap. Kid Roots, interactive farming kits plus AI app for school gardens. The pilot launched in 6 cities. Within 6 months, 200 schools were using it. Children were naming their plants, tracking growth with sensors, and learning not just how things grow, but why it matters. And it kept growing. The UN reached out. They were launching a sustainable farming initiative across East Africa and wanted Verdant Mind as the backbone. Jordan hesitated. He didn't care for titles or press. But when they mentioned a rural village in Tanzania with 500 children in a single broken irrigation pipe, he flew out the next week. He worked shoulder to shoulder with local engineers, redesigned their solar pump layouts, and even coded late into the night under mosquito netting. No entourage, no cameras. By the end of the second week, crops were back. The school reopened, and a small plaque appeared beside the rebuilt well. For the fathers who loved the land and the sons who remembered. Back on his farm, Jordan started something new. He took a portion of his profits and launched a fellowship. Not for coders, but for burned-out dreamers, artists, teachers, nurses, engineers. People on the verge of walking away from everything were invited to stay on the farm for 1 month. No expectations, just fresh air, quiet, and a community that listened. They called it the Reboot Room. And the stories that emerged? A nurse who wrote a children's book, a lawyer who became a beekeeper, a former startup founder who opened a therapy retreat for tech execs with PTSD. Jordan never judged their paths. He just kept tending his rows of spinach, turning soil, letting the world come, rest, and decide what it needed to be next. And yet underneath it all, something still tugged at him, a loose thread he hadn't pulled. His father's journal, found wedged behind a dresser after the funeral, its pages still unread, still unopened. It sat on a shelf above the fireplace, bound in cracked leather, its spine slightly warped from years of use. Jordan would glance at it sometimes while sipping coffee or feeding the fire, but never reach for it, not yet. Instead, he poured his energy into growing the movement. Verdant Mind became more than just a platform. It became a revolution. What began as a rural farming assistant had now evolved into a global agri-intelligence network. It partnered with NASA's Earth observation program. It integrated with drone-delivered irrigation in India. It even supported indigenous farming collectives in British Columbia by helping reintroduce ancient crop cycles using modern data analytics. And through all of this, Jordan never once stepped on a red carpet or gave a keynote speech. But stories about him kept spreading. A small vineyard in Italy named a wine after him. Terra Hail, the soil that remembers. A mural of his father planting seeds was painted in a Nairobi community center. One of the world's top chefs used Verdant Mind's eco-data to create the first Michelin-starred zero-waste tasting menu. And yet Jordan remained on the farm. Every Sunday, locals came to what they jokingly called Jordan's Market, though he never charged $1. They'd exchange fresh eggs for homemade jam, swap poetry for potatoes. Retired scientists debated irrigation with college dropouts. Children read aloud from their garden journals. One woman, recently widowed, started a composting club in her husband's honor and called it Growth After Grief. It was never just about food. It was about rebuilding something, a rhythm, a trust. And quietly, Jordan kept funding it all. Schools in Detroit, rooftop farms in Lagos, climate-resilient rice banks in Bangladesh. But he did it all anonymously, through a nonprofit he called the Root Code. One spring, a storm wiped out an entire village's bean crop in Honduras. Within 72 hours, Verdant Mind redirected 3 nearby farms to reroute their surplus. No middlemen, no red tape. The aid came, packed in burlap sacks with notes from other farmers. Jordan got a thank you video. A little boy held up a sign, "You don't know me, but you saved my dinner." He watched that video 5 times, then turned it into a campaign, not for fundraising, but to remind other tech founders what real impact looked like. That summer, a surprising call came in. The Vatican. A delegation was building a global ethics panel around AI and human flourishing. They asked Jordan to serve as a founding voice. At first, he declined. Then they told him, "The Pope read your story. He said the world needs your type of code." Jordan flew to Rome. He didn't speak from notes, just told the truth about his father, the farm, the failure of machines to fix what matters most. The auditorium of theologians and technologists gave him a silent standing ovation. No cheers, just quiet reverence. Afterward, a nun approached him, pressing a worn envelope into his hand. "You've done much for the world," she said, "but maybe it's time to open the one thing still unopened." Inside the envelope was a bookmark. It matched the one on the shelf back home, the one wedged into the middle of his father's journal. Back at the farm, the wind picked up. The field shimmered like a sea of memory. And that night, after nearly 2 years of avoiding it, Jordan finally climbed the creaky wooden stairs, reached for the leather-bound book, and held it in his hands. Still unopened, still waiting, but outside the earth was thriving. And so was everything he had planted since walking away from the life everyone else said he'd never leave. In just 3 years, Jordan Hale's farm had become a living laboratory for what was now being called the regenerative tech movement, a growing alliance of farmers, engineers, climate scientists, and educators rethinking how food, tech, and community could work together without extraction. Agritech Publications nicknamed his method Code to Compost. A university in Kyoto redesigned its agricultural AI curriculum based on Verdant Mind's decentralized farmer-first model. MIT invited him to co-teach a course called Future Soil, but Jordan declined. He was too busy helping a group of Navajo teenagers code a moisture sensor system for ancestral farmland. They called him Tech Shepherd. He never corrected them. Each month brought something new. A former oil executive transformed 10,000 acres of Texas wasteland into native prairie using Verdant Mind's rewilding module. A retired war medic in Colombia used the platform to teach ex-child soldiers how to farm mushrooms for food and profit. A documentary crew followed a community of blind farmers in Nepal using AI-guided voice tools Jordan's team had prototyped during a weekend hackathon. And in the middle of it all was Jordan, still quietly waking before dawn, tending soil with bare hands, shaking off the fame like dust from his boots. At night, he sat under string lights strung between apple trees, listening to a rotating crew of musicians, poets, and once-lost wanderers who had found their way to the farm. They called themselves the Diggers, people who had once buried their dreams but were now digging them back up. One evening, as summer softened into early autumn, a tall man with a camera showed up unannounced. He had flown in from France, said he'd spent 6 months trying to track Jordan down. He didn't want an interview, just permission. "I want to follow your farms," he said, "not your face." Jordan agreed, quietly, cautiously. 6 months later, that filmmaker's documentary, Rooted, the Code That Grew Backwards, premiered at Sundance. It won the Grand Jury Prize and led to thousands of volunteer sign-ups for climate-smart farming initiatives across 5 continents. Still, Jordan didn't attend the premiere. He was home, helping a local teenager fix a broken beehive. The breakthroughs kept coming. Verdant Mind launched Voice of the Soil, an audio interface that could read soil health aloud to low-literacy farmers. It was translated into 42 languages in less than a year. Jordan didn't just applaud the tech. He sent handwritten letters to every translator, thanking them for giving soil a voice humans could finally hear. At the World Food Summit, leaders presented data showing that farms using Verdant Mind's tools had seen a 60% average increase in food production and a 40% drop in pesticide usage. But the most surprising number? The suicide rate among small farmers in 5 pilot regions had dropped by over 80%. Because they no longer felt alone, because they felt heard. Still, Jordan hadn't touched the journal. Sometimes he'd catch himself staring at it, mid-sentence, mid-walk, mid-conversation. It was like it had gravity, like it waited. But every time his hand reached for the cover, something would interrupt. A visitor needing help, a rainstorm rolling in, a moment too full of life to pull away from. Yet somehow the pages felt closer. The day would come, just not today. And so, the work continued. Verdant Mind expanded into urban food deserts, partnering with housing authorities to install rooftop smart gardens. A feature-length film based on one of the farm fellows, an ex-Wall Street analyst turned greenhouse counselor, received a surprise Oscar nomination. Jordan donated the prize money to an Argentinian seed bank destroyed in a fire. And that fall, 12 international schools added a new module to their ethics curriculum. The Jordan Hale model, leading without ego, innovating with earth. Jordan never claimed credit. He just smiled, wiped his hands on his jeans, and went back to planting garlic before the frost. By then, the farm had become more than a place. It was a symbol, a story people whispered to themselves when the city noise got too loud, when their startup pitch got rejected, when the dopamine of notifications wore thin. Visitors began showing up with no agenda, just a feeling that something here might help them breathe again. A young widow from Lisbon brought olive seeds from her husband's hometown. A saxophonist from Harlem composed a piece in the barn loft, inspired by the rustling of corn stalks. A group of monks came to study stillness in modern motion. No one left unchanged, and somehow, despite the growing legend, Jordan remained untouched by it all. He lived in the same tiny house at the edge of the orchard. No assistant, no chauffeur, no private chef. He brewed his own coffee, reused his boots until the soles wore out, and never let anyone call him visionary. He said he wasn't leading a movement. He was just listening to the ground. One Saturday morning, a 14-year-old boy named Mateo arrived with his mother from Bogota. Mateo had been diagnosed with severe anxiety after losing his father in a landslide. His therapist suggested trying something tactile, something alive. His mom had found Verdant Mind's youth program online and applied. They stayed in a small cabin behind the wildflower field. At first, Mateo barely spoke, but within days he was shadowing Jordan, watering basil, adjusting pH levels, asking about compost ratios. On the 5th day, he asked to plant something of his own. Jordan handed him a worn trowel. "Choose any spot," he said. "Let the soil tell you." Mateo picked a quiet corner beneath an old oak tree. He planted marigolds. By the end of the week, he was smiling again, laughing even. His mother wept when she saw him run. That same month, Verdant Mind launched its most ambitious initiative yet, Farms Without Borders. Using AI and blockchain, it connected surplus crops from small farms in one part of the world with food-insecure communities in another, without government delays or exploitative logistics. The first success? A surplus of potatoes from Dutch farms rerouted to war-affected towns in eastern Ukraine, packed, shipped, and delivered within 96 hours. The UN issued a public commendation, but Jordan didn't post about it. He was in the greenhouse, teaching a 92-year-old woman how to train tomato vines using recycled yarn. Meanwhile, word of the journal on the shelf had become a kind of farm legend. No one ever saw Jordan open it, but everyone sensed it was there, something sacred, suspended. Even those closest to him never asked about it. They didn't need to. The not knowing was part of the magic, like the unopened letter in a great novel, like a well-tilled field waiting for spring. And then came the call. An emergency meeting in Geneva. A climate data anomaly was triggering widespread panic. Major regions were projecting catastrophic crop failures within a decade. The top tech leaders, world economists, and climate scientists were gathering to build a plan. But the chair of the council said something unusual. "We'll start when Jordan gets here." He didn't arrive on a jet. He came in work pants and a linen shirt, carrying a mason jar of wildflower honey as a thank you gift. And when he walked into that glass-walled room overlooking Lake Geneva, every conversation stopped. Because Jordan Hale didn't bring models. He brought results. He presented Verdant Mind's outcomes, quietly without fanfare. He showed before and after satellite photos, shared testimonials from Afghan widows, Icelandic fishermen, and Ghanaian cocoa farmers. He ended by saying, "We don't need to predict the future. We need to plant it." The room gave a standing ovation. The global task force voted unanimously to adopt his open-source farm AI model as a foundation for future food systems worldwide. Still, Jordan caught the early train home. By the time he got back, the garlic was already poking through the soil. And on the porch, a marigold in a clay pot with a note from Mateo. "I don't panic anymore when it rains." Jordan read it, then looked up at the horizon. The journal was still on the shelf, unopened, waiting. But the world, it was blooming. By year 4, Verdant Mind was no longer just a tool. It had become infrastructure. Governments, once skeptical of open-source agricultural tech, were now building national food strategies around it. In Ethiopia, smallholder wheat yields doubled. In Bangladesh, river-based farms used Verdant Mind to adapt to rising flood zones. In Brazil, the Amazon's edge was being reforested with AI-guided permaculture that mimicked ancient tribal methods, restoring ecosystems faster than any policy ever had. And on a quiet hillside in Mendocino, Jordan Hale watched it all unfold like rain on a dry field. But he remained grounded, literally. When a camera crew from National Geographic arrived to document the man who rewrote food, they found him waist-deep in compost, sorting eggshells from coffee grounds. "We'll wait," the producer whispered. They did for 2 hours. Jordan eventually offered them tea and a firm no to interviews. Instead, he gave them access to everyone else. The farmhands, the volunteers, the recovering addicts planting sweet potatoes, the 10-year-olds testing soil pH with strips and laughter, the beekeeper couple who'd met at one of his fellowships and were now teaching veterans how to raise hives. The documentary aired 6 months later. It won a Peabody. But in the credits, Jordan was only listed once: farm host. The local town, once sleepy and passed over, had transformed into a quiet magnet for builders and believers. A shuttered general store reopened as a regenerative cafe and learning center. A vacant field became a rotating global plot, each month showcasing crops from a different country, tended by immigrants, refugees, or cultural elders. Jordan called it the Circle Garden. One day, an 83-year-old man from Syria stood in front of a bed of za'atar and whispered, "I haven't smelled this in 40 years." It made national headlines. Jordan declined the CNN feature request. Instead, he wrote a personal letter to the man's grandchildren, encouraging them to record his recipes and teach them at school potlucks. Back on the farm, his fellowship program expanded again. Now called the Root Shift, it included 5 tracks: soil health, climate justice, tech for good, creative renewal, and what Jordan humbly called unburning. It welcomed founders who'd walked away from billion-dollar valuations, nurses grieving lives they couldn't save, teachers who had lost their spark. One alum started a publishing house for memoirs by the formerly incarcerated. Another launched a mental health hotline for farmers facing climate anxiety. A third, a South Korean engineer, created a low-cost irrigation kit that UNICEF adopted in 17 countries. Jordan celebrated each win the same way: a handwritten note, and a quiet walk among the rows at sunset. And still the journal waited, unopened. Then came the summit invitation: Davos, global leaders, bankers, heads of state. They wanted Jordan to speak, not on AI or tech, but on reclaiming the soul of innovation. He hesitated, but his mentor, an old botanist who once taught him to listen to plants by watching how they turned in the morning sun, sent him a single message: sometimes the seed doesn't need more soil, it needs light. So Jordan packed a canvas bag, no entourage, no slides. On the Davos stage in front of cameras and CEOs, he told a story about how his father once grew sunflowers during a brutal drought. And when neighbors asked why, he said, "If they bloom, we'll eat. If they don't, at least we remembered beauty." He ended with this: what you build with your mind must also be safe to bury in the earth. And if it's not, maybe it shouldn't grow. That clip went viral. In a week, it had over 60 million views. But Jordan didn't track the metrics. He was back home, hands in the dirt, teaching a group of first graders how to recognize ladybugs from aphids. He called it bug math. He paused only once, when a gust of wind from the open porch door lifted the corner of the old leather journal. He looked at it, but didn't reach. Not yet. Outside, the garlic was ready to harvest, and from the hilltop, you could now see farms in every direction, solar-powered, sensor-guided, community-run, and bursting with life. The world was growing back, and the man who left it all behind to follow the whisper of soil, he was right where he belonged, still waiting, still planting, still listening. The waiting, in fact, had become a kind of rhythm. Every season brought a new harvest, yes, but also a new story, a new ripple from some part of the world where his quiet decision had stirred something deep and lasting. In northern Scotland, a group of single mothers converted an abandoned golf course into a biodiverse vegetable co-op, using Verdant Mind's topography maps. In Chile, teenagers developed a solar dehydration model for post-harvest fruit waste, turning excess peaches into shelf-stable nutrition for disaster zones. None of these efforts bore Jordan's name, but they all bore his fingerprints, his philosophy woven into the roots of a system that had stopped asking how fast and started asking how well. Back on the farm, things had taken on a new rhythm. Friday nights were now called table evenings, open-air potlucks under the fig trees, where no one asked what you did for a living. People came to share sourdough, stories, seeds, and sometimes silence. There were no schedules, no speeches, just fireflies, laughter, and food passed hand to hand. On one such evening, a man named Thomas arrived with a weathered face and shoulders, like he'd been carrying too many things for too long. No one asked why he was there, but when a boy tripped over a root and scraped his knee, Thomas silently pulled out a small bottle of homemade salve and gently applied it with hands that had once stitched flesh in war zones. By the end of the night, someone had placed a sign beside his chair: Thomas, herbalist, teacher, listener. He never left. The stories kept multiplying. A high school in Detroit used Verdant Mind to launch a farm-to-lunchroom program that reduced cafeteria waste by 70%. A tech worker in South Korea, disillusioned by burnout, used the platform to turn a rooftop into an edible classroom for autistic children. A prison in Finland transformed its exercise yard into a butterfly sanctuary. None of it was orchestrated, it was emergent, like water finding cracks and roots pushing through concrete. And in the center of it all, Jordan remained a steady pulse, always digging, always watching, always quiet when others would have spoken. Then came the email. From the daughter of a farmer in Sudan, she wrote in careful English, "My father said your tools saved our land. I am learning software engineering because I want to build like you. I also want to grow onions." Jordan printed it out and pinned it beside the shelf where the journal still rested, its cracked spine now touched by soft dust, but undisturbed, almost sacred. Some part of him still hesitated to break that seal, not out of fear, but out of respect, like opening a time capsule before the right season had arrived. In the meantime, the world continued its quiet revolution. Verdant Mind partnered with SpaceX to launch a microsatellite, Verdant 1, to map soil degradation patterns across drought zones in real time. It became the backbone of the Food First protocol, adopted by 18 nations. Still, Jordan kept his distance from the headlines. He preferred walking the perimeter fences with the interns, teaching them how to read the bend in a sunflower stalk or the way bees react before rain. He taught by presence, not projection. And one of his favorite things was still the Saturday seed swap. Last week, a 9-year-old brought in a shoebox of mystery beans she'd found in her grandmother's attic. Jordan helped her plant them anyway. "I don't know what they are," she said. "Maybe they're waiting to remember," he replied. And always the visitors kept coming, not in mobs but in quiet waves. A young monk from Bhutan, a disillusioned ad executive from Sao Paulo, a climate refugee from Fiji who wanted to learn how to turn seaweed into fertilizer. They came not to meet a celebrity, but to feel something different, something real. Some of them cried when they left. Others stayed to build cabins. One couple asked if they could get married beneath the sycamore tree, and Jordan himself baked the bread for their ceremony. They didn't use rings, they exchanged seeds. Still, the journal remained unopened, and yet its presence began to feel less like absence and more like potential, like compost that hadn't bloomed yet, like a melody still waiting for the last note. Jordan sometimes stood near it, brushing his fingertips along its surface. Not to open it, but to acknowledge it. He understood now. The journal didn't need to be rushed, because not all things are meant to be read before they're lived. Outside, the first frost of the year dusted the fields in silver. Carrots were ready, the marigolds had returned, and the garlic, it had multiplied. The world was still blooming, and so was he. Sometimes the most powerful change doesn't come from a grand speech or a viral moment, or even a billion-dollar idea. Sometimes it comes from walking away, from listening instead of leading, from letting something grow, not because you know what it will become, but because you trust that it will. Jordan Hale never opened the journal, not because he was afraid of what was inside, but because he was living the answer one seed, one sunrise, one quiet act at a time. Maybe the real story was never about what he left behind, but about what the world rediscovered when he finally stood still. If this story stirred something in you, even just a whisper, take a moment. Drop a comment and tell us what you would walk away from to start again. Smash that like button, subscribe for more powerful true stories like this, and turn on notifications so you never miss a twist. And remember, some roots take time to grow.